It's our
I'm,
cue to begin.
I'm so happy to be here today with you, Melissa Petro, talking about this book that I just read 2 weeks ago called Shame on You, How to Be a Woman in the Age of Mortification. I have so many questions, but I also just want to start by saying thank you for talking to me about this book technically before it actually comes out. This is a book I've been talking to my friends about. All of us in this industry talk, I think, sort of recklessly about the word shame. It's just incredible to actually have a book that is, part investigation, part actual like reckoning exploration that is doing so much of this work honestly for us. So anyway, thank you for making space for us and thank you for making a book that so many of us have sort of been waiting for.
I've been working to tell this story for, I think I started in my early 20s. I'm 44 now, and I really fought for some space to tell this story. And I'm grateful for my team because they really compelled me to work harder and not just write a memoir. Not that memoirs aren't a lot of work and
Right.
important work as well, but I wanted to do something larger than just my story. Well, they compelled me to do that,
Yeah.
and in doing so, I really had to see how my story was so ubiquitous.
Yeah. Yeah.
And can I just begin by saying why I wanted
Sure.
to speak with you?
Yeah. It's your
Um,
show. Do your thing.
I read your essay, My Vassar College Faculty ID Makes Everything Okay. I'm going to fangirl for a minute. I
Okay.
read that from the rubber room when I was removed from my teaching job and put into what they call the rubber room, which is reassignment teachers who've been like removed from the classroom and put on desk duty. They put me in this room. I had nothing to do, but I had a computer in front of me, and I started reading sites. Lots of times, people who, if they had written something about me, I discovered it, and that's how I found Gawker and Jezebel. I
Mhm.
wasn't a writer for the internet. I didn't know anything about contemporary essays. I didn't know that people were writing the kind of writing that you did, and that essay was like a lifeline for me. I'm going to get
Wow.
emotional, but it really was one of the first times I saw someone speaking just it's with such vulnerability about their
Yeah.
experience, and being in that place of unbelonging between two worlds is a place I knew very well.
Wow. Wow. You know what's ironic about that? And is that I'm so thankful that that essay hit you somewhere, but also it's one of the essays that I'm most ashamed of, ironically. And maybe we can get to that.
I
But
want to, can we get to that right first? Because I was wondering if that was one of like, you know how like you like hit it really hard in the beginning of your career? Like my
yeah.
essays for the Rumpus, when I started out as a
Ooh.
writer, I was so raw because I had no
Yo.
idea
Yeah.
people were actually reading it.
Yeah.
I didn't, and I certainly didn't realize it could be taken out of context and
Right.
willfully misconstrued and used against me. So I was
100%.
writing with this rawness and this vulnerability and this just a sort of honesty that I could never find now
Right.
because I'm just
Yeah.
too aware. I have too many
Yeah.
filters and masks, but I just that essay felt so real. I was like, that is like a great, like, can you ever do that again? And you're telling me that it's not an essay you're particularly proud of.
I mean, it just caused so much damage. And
Mhm.
like now in my writing practice, I would have known that that essay you read, that version of it, even though it was like 8 drafts, like that one was for me. I could, I kind of needed to go back through it again. And I mean, I don't know if I should say this or not because it hit you, but it and it found you. But I wasn't ready for that essay to be read. That's what I'll
Yeah.
say. And
I hear
but
you. I mean, as someone,
and
I felt
absolutely,
consequences from my
yes,
writing as well. But to
that's
think that
what.
you gave that gift to us, and then it motivated me and inspired me to think of myself as a writer, even though I felt like an imposter in
That's so
every
interesting
sense.
because your book in a just like a writerly sense because I think when you're out on the road people are going to be using this word courage a lot, and every time people use that word I just always want us to slow down and actually talk about what we're talking about, because sometimes I think you can use courage to not talk about the thing. what I'm so like inspired by in this book has so much to do with will, but also structure, fam, because you do what people are going to call investigative reporting in this book, and then you do what people are going to call self-help in this book, but you start right where you just talked to me. You start in this place where you're making a decision about like, do I resign? Like, what am I going to do right now, right? Like, you start there and you take us somewhere, I think, wholly unexpected. And you could have inverted it, right? You could have done the investigation part and then kind of like siphon it down to like the individual, like the origin. But talk to us if you can about why you start where you start. And I believe that sets up where you end up going because I believe you. But why do you start there?
I mean, this book always started there. It started as a memoir, and it started as a, you know, writings to myself
Hmm.
to make meaning of myself and my experience. And the only way I knew how to do that publicly for some time was to describe it as ethnographic research and
Right.
like take an academic lens. And I
Right.
read research about women's experiences in the sex trade. And it was, all of that jargon I kind of laid on top of anything about myself and published.
Yep.
And I still wasn't out about my own experience, but that moment that I learned how obfuscating and ineffectual and counterproductive and harmful that stance was, and the
Yeah.
moment I accepted the genre of memoir, I learned what that meant
Right.
and what it took to look at yourself through that narrative, like narrator versus
Yeah.
protagonist, that, really like kind of like distance myself from the experience and study it critically and learn as a result that, there's a little difference. You've transformed just a bit if you're
Right.
able to. I'm no longer ashamed. Because I've given it that word. I can
Yeah.
sign language to it. So when I started to do that as a memoirist, that was so transformative and such a gift to myself. And that's how I became the woman who was able to, um, that was just liberated from the grips
Right.
of that experience.
Yeah.
Uh, that's always been what I feel is my expertise. I
Right.
am an expert of myself and my experience, and I have transformed as a result of writing about it.
Hmm.
And I've also, found these other instructions along the way. And the book is really a journeying through my experience of what I use the word recovery, um, resilience, shame,
Right.
that development, just to who I am today.
Yeah.
And I did some research, and obviously I did interviews for the sake of the book, but a lot of it was just so organic, and it was just a retelling of the path I took and my experiences that informed this greater knowledge about this topic. I didn't know this book was about shame when I started writing it.
What
I
you
didn't
think it was about?
I thought it was about a woman who worked as a sex worker and the experiences I had, and then I became a mom, and it was about me.
Right.
It was
Right.
about my situation. There wasn't a
Yeah.
story. And it really took a lot of people, and that's interesting and titillating to readers, and my story is unique in its own ways, and in some ways not. But I didn't really know what it was about until I I really had a lot of guidance from
Right.
people who were able to say, and then there's a lot of truth to it still. In the beginning, I like in tongue in cheek call myself a shame whisperer and say that people are constantly coming to me and
Yeah.
telling me their deepest, darkest confessions. That does happen. It's happened for decades. It's a space that I create for people, and we're just, trading these like truths about the human experience. But I didn't really credit myself as a journalist or an expert. And I didn't know how to make that expertise and the vulnerability that we discover within
Yeah.
ourselves as memoirs, I didn't know
Right.
how to put them in one book. It was
Yeah.
it was challenging. The structure is challenging, and I'm still unsure if it's
But
working,
but
but that's
to
me.
me, to me, it works. And so much of what I mean, I think there's more than threes, but so much of what I think makes the beginning and the end, quote unquote, work are really like that reportage, like the reporting you just did. We talked about yourself as like the shame whisperer. I'm interested in how folks talk to you if you use the word shame in your story when approaching them, because like these actual people who talk to you and tell you life stories, homie, it's like,
Listen,
go
so
ahead.
if I had come at it in this like objective journalistic finding sources kind of way, I would never have
Right.
received the stories that were gifted to me. I'm from like feminist methodologies. There is no such thing as objectivity. This is our subjective lens. Like I said, qualitative research. I mean,
Right.
I really didn't follow any sort of like I'm not a journalist by education, and I didn't
Right.
approach it in this objective way. I approached it very organically. I reached out to friends and friends of friends, and I found people who already understood me and my experience, whether they were friends or just understood it because they'd read my work. They were urgent in their desire to tell their stories to me. They completely understood the assignment. They
Mm,
knew what my thesis was just in
mm,
their bones, and
mm-hmm.
they were ready to participate in this reckoning.
That's
I think if
awesome.
I had tried to find people who didn't know me, and I'm blessed with like this beautiful group of oftentimes very shame resilient,
Hmm.
and a very diverse group of a community that had come together, and it was just a really, really organic process.
And what I love about what you do also in this book is that you take these words that for better or worse have been, sort of just made ubiquitous, right? Like spiraling, shame. A lot of people use these words now as like placeholders, I
Hmm.
think, for what we're actually exploring. And I'm really interested in like this idea that you say about the shame spiral, right? Failing to live up to society's outdated public image of who we are. And so much of this book to me is about capitalism and about
Right.
market and how the market drives this sort of like incessant necessary shame. Can you talk about just like the market drivenness or when you realized that so much of what you were feeling was market driven because your story is rooted in like the market not making place, right? For people
Right.
who are teaching, like I just think so much of market is in this book and I wonder if you can talk about that a bit.
Right. And it's interesting because a lot of shame resilience or sh anti-shame movement has kind of sold more products to us in order
Right.
to overcome our shame.
Yes.
Or
Yes.
even like you said about language and words like losing their meaning. Like even the word shame, we're so quick to name it and move on. Like I don't
Yeah.
feel ashamed. We don't
Right.
actually feel that feeling. But like Prentice Hemphill talks about how feeling is revolutionary. Like if shame and shaming is bound up with social inequality and it's just reflecting and reinforcing and reinstating and legitimizing this white middle class heteronormative status quo, then to actually feel that feeling and embody it and to not disavow it, but to be in our experience and to acknowledge the pain, then we can start to move to our like better brains and start
Mm-hmm.
to act rather than react. So shame just has us reacting in a way to avoid that feeling.
Right.
We shame someone else, so we shift the shame. We're angry, or we fawn. We try to people please, or
Yeah.
we make ourselves small, or we just act in some addictive way to avoid that feeling. Anything, but just allowing it to be felt because it feels too big and too terrifying. But how radical then is it to instead of running off to buy something or rejecting a part of yourself and any of those behaviors, instead of any of that behavior, to actually own it, to feel it, and then to make up our minds, what's the best course of action for myself and my community?
Yeah.
That absolutely is going to disrupt the status quo. Because once we start to do that, we're not going to buy that thing. We're not going to hate that part of ourselves. We're not going to shame someone else into fitting a narrower status quo, we're
Right.
going to start to recognize collectively that that voice telling us to be that way is actually wrong. That there's nothing wrong with the way we are, and there's nothing wrong with the way you are.
I love it. And like I'm so happy I get to talk to you because I just kept talking back the whole time I was reading the book, like asking questions of you aloud. And I'm wondering then what we do with the fact that a lot of us have jobs and part of what
Right.
our jobs do is make us shame, right? Like part of our jobs is like we have to make you feel shame enough to invest in this kind of labor in ways that, for a lot of people don't create a living wage. How do we, if what you say,
No, we got to get along to get along,
yeah, how
right?
do we, yeah, and how do we get to the radical empathy and to the disruption when
Mhm.
a lot of us have to wake up and necessarily go to places where we have to feel shame in order to bring a check home? That's what I
But
kept
this is
wondering.
why, yeah, exactly. And th this is why this feeling is so ubiquitous. We're
Yeah.
constantly putting ourselves in positions. And where there's a gap between our lived experience and our ideals. So we wish we
Hmm.
can be this and say this and do this and behave in these ways. This is our ideal, but here's the way we have to conform to belong. And this
Hmm.
is actually why shame is like this primitive natural emotion. It's a feeling of belonging. And some people think shame is positive because, oh, it makes us co conform and
Right.
it creates a social a social standing and we're a collectivity. But that would be true if we were all belonging to an ideal that actually matched
Hmm.
what we aspired to live
Hmm.
up to. But unfortunately, we're kind of conforming to an ideal that isn't reflective of who we are and what we want the world to look like.
Hmm.
So we make decisions, and some decisions are made for us, and therefore we don't know always, is it me or is it the world?
Right.
I think that, obviously women have been taught that like, oh, we're empowered and these are our choices and we made a choice and then we own it. And something I've learned as a result of my experience is that a lot of choices are made by circumstance or by the
Right.
choices afforded to us. And
Right.
and we the more aware we are of that and forgiving we are of ourselves and others, the less we're driven by shame.
Yeah. Yeah. I was thinking a lot about the title, like the use of the word mortification on the cover of a book. Like that to me, like as someone who thinks about bookmaking, I was like, that's a move right there. I wonder if you could talk about the age of mortification and why it was necessary for you to get that. And it could have been on the cover and very small, but I think it's big in the book as well. But talk about mortification and how you came to that subhead for the book.
It's really interesting when it was offered to me at some point in the publishing process, and I was unsure um, how fitting it was. And then I really
Hmm.
started to think about it. And when you start to do research on how shame impacts our physical and mental health,
Yes.
it's not an exaggeration to say that shame can kill us. Heart disease is the leading
Question.
death of women, and there's all of these ways of linking shame to heart disease, especially for Black women.
Right.
It's affecting our physical health. It affects our mental health. It's the driving force behind depression and addiction and all of these ways that we're slowly killing ourselves, literally. It plays a part in, and then it also just erodes our sense of self to the extent that we might as well be dead. The who we truly are is not
Yeah.
allowed to be, which
Right.
is a mortification in a different
Yes.
way. Um, I felt, at times in writing this book, it was so triggering. And I consider myself relatively shame resilient, but
Right.
none of
Yeah.
us are resistant. And we're
Yes.
all still vulnerable to these forces that are so incredibly painful,
Yeah.
that they really, this shit will take you out.
Definitely. And I hear you and feel you reaching for life, even in calling it shame resilience instead of shamelessness, right? Like, can you talk
Absolutely.
about
And
that?
that's like cribbing off of like old school experts like Brené Brown, and they've
Of
come up
course.
with that term. Yeah, we resist. And this is a resistance. And shame resilience is an act of resistance. And being who we are is constantly resisting these negative voices, including the ones we've conditioned to internalize,
Hmm.
constantly resisting that pull towards um, anything other than our authentic selves.
Hmm. And one of the big questions that I had, really, like when you were doing a lot of the interviews, was like whether or not this shame, resilience, it feels like it's made more possible through kinds of community and
Absolutely.
communing. And I think that's so important for a story that on the surface appears to be so individual, right? Like,
Right.
look, here's this teacher who was going through this fucked up shit that she should have never had to be going through. And at the end, look, she's in a family, da 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 da. Da. But it's not that book, right? Like it's interesting to me that it's not that like very neat book, but it could have been. And so I'm just wonder if you could like tease out the ways that you actually like kind of messed up the book by not making it so neatly closed at the end.
Well, we think about like shame feels very personal. Like it's like you're like I say in the book, I think it's still there. I hope it didn't get edited out. That like recovery circles, they say you feel like a piece of shit in the center of
Right,
the universe. Like you're
right.
just so exceptionally wrong and bad, like uniquely fucked up. That's shame makes us feel that way. And whether it's because you burned your kids breakfast or okay, I dropped my kid off in boots this morning that were three sizes too small or too bit
Right.
large. And I like fucks me up. Like, why am
Yeah,
I not a good enough mom to like have her boots ready for day one on
right.
kindergarten? You know, whether it's that or whether it's someone calling you an idiot prosty teacher on the
Hmm.
cover of a national paper, you're like, it's the same feeling. It feels so unique in our
Right.
bodies. It happens in my body, which is a very personal action, a personal feeling. But it's that same feeling that we can all feel. And when it feels so personal, it is too big, but
Hmm.
collectively we can feel that and hold that. In the book, I talk about how we create safe containers where we start to share our experiences aloud. And in doing so, we can start to make meaning and liberate ourselves from that pain, which is like you, we just had COVID first time. And like that feeling in your chest when you're before the cough breaks, when you
Hmm.
just feel like, you know, it's there and it's like everything feels tight. It's so much more like freeing when you've got that productive cough, and those
Hmm.
are the sort of
Yes.
spaces we create
So
um,
true.
when we start to just share that ickiness, and we
Yeah.
realize it's not so bad, and we get rid of that.
You know, two of the words that you know, make, deploy, and I say make because I felt these words differently in this text than I've felt them before, and it was like quiet, calm. You know, like we need to approach like this shame with like a quiet calm. And I'm interested if you can explore it. We'll talk about that even more next to the importance of community, right? Because quiet and calm often feel like solitary things. But talk about the importance of
Mhm.
quiet and calm
All
when
right.
being shame
Yeah.
resilient. Yeah.
So I have a 6-year-old who has learning differences. Has got special needs, and he has a one-on-one at school that's like an adult with him the whole time because he needs constant co-regulation. His nervous system is just like he inherited it. You know what I mean?
That's funny.
He inherited all
Yeah,
of it, and it's all in his little body. And
yeah,
he's seeking, and he's afraid, like all of the his body is just anything but calm.
right.
And he needs a someone who's regulated with him because that's what we have to learn to do when our body is dysregulated by
Hmm.
shame or any negative feeling. We have to learn to bring it in so that we can control it. We have to
Right.
learn, which is not to say to control the feeling. You feel the feeling, but you control your responses to that feeling. And sometimes we can't do it. My kid can't do it. He needs another body with him. And when we have conversations with people one on one, when we have a reciprocal relationship where we're making eye contact, where the way you're nodding, you hear me, I feel seen, heard
Right.
and understood, and it relaxes my entire nervous system. So when I was in, recovery, or any kind of, there's other ways like group therapies or
Yeah.
spaces where there's bodies of people. Church is probably this way. I'm not a church goer, but I imagine you're entering a room with other bodies who are present and willing to contain whatever chaos you bring into that space. They're there to hold you
Right.
and to nurture you, like a parent might. And that safe container teaches you to become a safe container.
I
So
feel
when
that.
you can do this with someone, and I do this shit all day long. You don't
Right.
think I already told that story about the boots like 3 times this week
Right.
to
Right.
other parents?
Yeah.
Because I have to. Otherwise, it's just going to be in my body. And it's going to be the ghost in the machine. I'm just going to be
Yeah.
reacting to that feeling of inadequacy unless
Right.
I name it. And someone hears me and acknowledges it. And now my nervous system can contain that just bit
Yeah.
more deliberately.
Yeah. I'm really thinking a lot about the relationships between shame, humiliation, and this word that you use in the book and in this conversation, titillation.
Hmm.
And particularly like do we should we can we say the newspaper, should we say the newspaper who did what they did?
You can name it. I don't, yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, I'm not sure for people, but anyway, but I've been just writing so much about fucking like meanness, and I keep on trying to come up with all these different words, all of these different words, and I haven't been, and I found like maybe a paragraph or so, but just in terms of like words, I understand a lot of what you're doing in this book is sitting in the desire that for some reason that we have not just to be titillated, but to be titillated from others, and particularly like women's humiliation. What do you do with the meanness? Like literally like living the meanness of that magazine. They had no reason to do that shit to my estimation. Like how do you live with that
It
meanness?
is really shocking, right? Like
That shit is fucked
sometimes
up, yo.
I
It's
would
like
stand
I just need to
outside
say it.
myself.
Can we just
And
say how? Can we just say that it is like it's normal, but it's still so out of this world fucked up what they did to you.
let me tell you a story, and this was funny. I actually, some years later, after the New York Post humiliated me on its cover, I actually, so the whole time I'm like, who are these human beings behaving this way? Like, what do they truly believe? I had friends who worked for the New York Post, as reporters after that, because I was a writer. Like, it
Right,
wasn't out of
right.
my wheelhouse who they were and what their jobs were. So I was really curious about them. Anyway, I actually ended up dating a reporter for the New York Post.
Wow.
Completely, like, we met on OkCupid. This was
Yeah.
not like, it wasn't on purpose, but in a sense it was,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because he was like a progressive, like, I'm so sorry that happened to you kind of dude. And I was like still in some ways seeking validation. And I had this like elaborate healing fantasy that I would go to their Christmas party. We only dated 8 months and we broke up. Like, I didn't go to the Christmas party,
Hmm.
but I really wanted to, because I wanted to look Andrea Pizer in the face and
Yes, man.
be Michael's girlfriend and
Right,
not the hooker teacher.
right, right.
And just to see if she could, I just yearned to be seen by these
Yeah,
human beings and to see
right,
them. But I actually don't think this is a unique experience. I think we
right,
all have that uncle who says that fucked up shit, and we're like, bro,
right.
you're talking about someone I love when you say
Right,
that, or you're talking
right.
about me.
Yeah,
How can you not see me as a human being? Um,
yeah,
these are the hard conversations we have to keep having,
yeah.
with people we love, and we have to recognize why we love them. And I don't know. This is what I mean about resistance and resilience. Like,
Right,
to live in a world, and I quote like Sonia Renee Taylor a lot about how like it's like you can't not deal with these
right,
people.
right,
They are they're the people we love. They're the
right,
people we date. The people we fuck. They're the
right,
people we raise
right,
and come home with these like ideas, and we have to just continue to be human and strive to see their humanity, so long as we're all trying to do better.
right.
But yeah, it's really interesting the way we sometimes treat each other and why. So you talked about that titillation. I get it too. I see someone do something fucked up on like Instagram on a
Yeah.
reel, and I get to the comments too because I want to hear what people have to,
Yeah.
because it kind of feels good, and the spotlight's off you for a second, and someone
Right.
else is fucking up and making a mistake, and that
Yeah.
kind of, ooh, someone made a mistake, not
Right.
me. So how do we get off the cycle of shame
Yeah.
and this culture of shame? How do we start to like listen to each other more compassionately and empathize
Yeah.
rather than just shame each other for our own entertainment and relief?
And it's really interesting, right? Because implication is something that you do in that book so much. I just think you definitely, when you don't even need to, right? You're like, yes, you do what you just did. I too titillate. Like, I too am a part of this culture that feeds
Absolutely.
off of this thing. Wow, this life, potentially life destructing thing is happening. And it made me just think about time. Because often I think when we think about quote unquote stories like yours, we be like, oh, that person persevered, they triumphed. How much of like the way shame works is necessarily like a past tense, a future tense, or present tense? Like, I read the book and felt like this is perpetual work, and it's not just in the past. It's literally it's
Absolutely.
body. Can we talk about that a bit?
Absolutely. And this is what I mean by it felt there's an awkwardness to describe myself as an expert and
Mm-hmm.
as if I've overcome. I do believe that as a result of my experience, I've developed a resilience. And I listened to a talk or a podcast with Stormy Daniels. Like that is one fucking shame resilient. Can I
Yo,
use this language? Like that she is tough,
right.
but she's not invulnerable.
No,
Nor should we strive for that.
no.
She's still very much hurt and harmed. You talk about like livelihoods and how like we can be impacted. These are not it's not just a matter of feelings. There's material consequences to shame and shaming, and that
Absolutely.
impacts us. And sometimes we just do what we have to do to survive,
Yes.
right? But we can become courageous, more courageous the more we survive through it in this mindful, embodied, cognizant way and a collective way. The more we
Right.
share that experience, that endurance together, then the braver and more courageous we become individually and as a society.
Absolutely. And last thing I just want to say is like again, so much of what you do is in our language, and so much of what you do is remind us that our languages are tied to systems. And when you just talked about Stormy Daniels, I mean, you talk about resilience, like I mean, every single day, people on the left attempt to humiliate Trump. What do they say about Stormy
Right,
Daniels? "Quote unquote porn star." Like
right.
that's the
Yeah, we're not really standing up for people, not really,
no.
because we're too fearful of losing whatever privilege we have, right? Or whatever, if the it's not pointed at us right now. So we're
Right.
gonna, stay quiet and meek instead of really standing up in a gutsy way for what we believe in.
Yeah.
Um, sometimes we just are bystanders. And in
Yes.
Judith Herman's book, Trauma and Recovery, there's perpetrators of trauma, there's victims of trauma, and then there's the bystander. And that role is so integral because if you're not taking the side of the victim, you are taking the side of the perpetrator. And the
Yep.
perpetrator asks you to do nothing, to
Right.
just stay quiet. But a
Right.
victim demands that you act up, say something, speak out, put yourself on the line. And oftentimes that's why it's easier to side with a
Absolutely.
perpetrator, but we must do better. So when we see somebody who's being shamed and dehumanized, don't hide behind your own respectability. I mean,
Right.
really, what I discovered in the end is so long as anyone is being disrespected and dehumanized, that's eroding your own
Yes.
humanity. And we need to stand up for other people because that really is standing up for yourself and standing up for humanity. And if your respectability comes at anyone else's disrepute, then it's worthless.
Hmm.
And that we need to start recognizing each other as human beings worthy of love.
And do you think that that recognition is possible if human beings don't have the will you had to actually talk through things that shame us most?
I think we are presented with so many opportunities every day to be courageous
Mm,
and to stand up for someone else. And sometimes it's easier to stand up for someone else than yourself.
right.
But if we just start to think, in what ways can I make someone else know that they are adequate and that they belong? That's doing a lot of healing for yourself too. Are we willing to do that work? I actually think we might be. I think we
Mhm.
might be. And I think women especially are just it's so familiar, sexist shame and the misogynistic shame. Like when it started to come at Kamala,
Yeah.
it didn't exhaust us the way it used
Right.
to. It energized.
Right.
It
Right.
energized people. And
Right.
I think if we can start to recognize that it's not going to defeat you. It will not bury you. It will not bury you because I'm with you too. We're together in this and we can do better. I believe that. And I do believe we're ready at the
That
end.
was good. That was really
And,
good. Yeah.
it's true. I do think that like people are just tired of being tired and being afraid. People are
You know,
tired
but
of being
but you
afraid.
know what? You know what I think when you were talking about okay, Cupid, like we're so tired of being afraid, but it's almost like where like how do we connect with people who are also okay talking
Do you know
about
what
how
I
tired they
do?
are of being afraid? Go ahead, tell me.
It's honestly like I think a lot of people do this. They drop little like hints that they're weird or like weird that they're willing to go there. Like you say the thing that's just like a little like outside the norm to see if
Yeah.
someone picks up on it and returns. Like I make friends everywhere I go because like
Right.
I'm like, "Hey, I've got a hemorrhoid. How are you?" Like
Right.
I
Right.
don't keep it in
Right.
because I want to see if you can return that volley. And
Yeah.
that's how I find people that I'm just like back and forth, really getting to the grit of life
Yeah.
because I don't got a lot of time here, do you? Like
No.
I want to
No.
live this life and like feel every feeling.
Yeah.
I don't got time to talk about the weather?
I feel you. I feel you. I feel you. Thank you. Thank you for writing this book. I'm sorry as a dude that I'm part of the reason you had to write this book. Um, and I also just think like for anybody really looking into the ways that the body is necessarily connected to the market and the market is connected to this emotionality that often does kill us, please, please, please read Shame on You. Melissa has created something I think is going to last for a long time for a lot of us. So thank you very much for making time for us today, and thank you.
Thank you for your work.